Welcome to the third and final reading session, Coffee with Dragon reading session for Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, the pillar. Still to fund much of the theories and the principles and the ideas and analysis outlining the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith is, of course, still a major part of the world economy today, 2019, May 1st. Third and final part, yours truly, Adrian H.Dragan, Universal Spiritual Teacher, World LGBTQ Citizen, Multidisciplinary International Artist, sore from working out. Yesterday broke a record again, and last week another record for a cardio walk, so now we'll train the mind for some reading and some meditation for wounded head healing. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. I'm going to be having a coffee and going to be adding a little bit of milk and honey. Question, of course, has capitalism delivered us the promised land of milk and honey? And of course, myself would say and always try to stay away from generalizations and discern and inquire in details and the diversity of each human being on the planet that, of course, it has for some. Not for me at the present moment, as I'm struggling with debt, paying interest. In 3 days, $80, which is just the interest servicing about $80 on $11,000 of debt. Struggling financially with my art, and nobody's financing this cup of coffee, private or public sponsors do not have at the present moment in time. And I got some milk, got some food, got some honey, and just the energy cup to fight another live, to fight another day, and the will. That stated, blessings to all my friends and allies, supporters, physically, spiritually, and financially. Blessings of healing in mind, body, and spirit. For all my friends and allies and supporters. Honey can be messy. What do you think about the current state in economics? Where is it all going with record-breaking stock market performances? And some have compared it to parallels for 1929 before the crash, as in September 1929 it had also reached record levels. So that it's possible with engaging trade wars and public and private debt and a lot of corporate debt, and there's the servicing of interest, and if capital stagnates in institutions or in private capital holders, then those can be some other factors besides other technical or even spiritual factors. Coffee with Dragon, Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith. Chapter 5 of the real and nominal price of commodities, or of their price in labor and their price in money. Every man is rich or poor according to the degree in which he can afford to enjoy the necessaries, conveniences, and amusements of human life. But after the division of labor has once thoroughly taken place, it is but a small part of these with which a man's own labor can supply him. The far greater part of them he must derive from the labor of other people, and he must be rich or poor according to the quantity of that labor which he can command, or which he can afford to purchase, The value of any commodity, therefore, to the person who possesses it, and who means not to use or consume it himself, but to exchange it for other commodities, is equal to the quantity of labor which it enables him to purchase or command. Labor, therefore, is the real measure of the exchangeable value of all commodities. The real price of everything, what everything really costs to the man who wants to acquire it, is the toil and trouble of acquiring it. What everything is really worth to the man who has acquired it and wants to dispose of it or exchange it for something else is the toil and trouble which it can save to himself, and which it can impose upon other people. What is bought with money or with goods is purchased by labor, as much as what we acquire by the toil of our own body. That money or those goods indeed save us this toil. They contain the value of a certain quantity of labor which we exchange for what is supposed at the time to contain the value of an equal quantity. Labor was the first price, the original purchase money that was paid for all things. It was not by gold or by silver, but by labor, that all the wealth of the world was originally purchased, and its value to those who possess it and who want to exchange it for some new productions is precisely equal to the quantity of labor which it can enable them to purchase or command. You have to, of course, engage in some meditative imagination, I would say, but meditation and imagination, or also meditative imagination, and to understand, visualize this. Of course, keep in mind that this is English from 1776, thus it might be not as obvious. Wealth, as Mr. Hobbes says, is power. The person who either acquires or succeeds to a great fortune does not necessarily acquire or succeed to any political power, either civil or military. His fortune may perhaps afford him the means of acquiring both, but the mere possession of that fortune does not necessarily convey to him either. The power which that possession immediately and directly conveys to him is the power of purchasing, a certain command over all the labor, or over all the produce of labor which is then in the market. His fortune is greater or less, precisely in proportion to the extent of this power, or to the quantity either of other men's labor, or what is the same thing, of the produce of other men's labor, which it enables him to purchase or command. The exchangeable value of everything must always be precisely equal to the extent of this power which it conveys to its owner. But though labor be the real measure of the exchangeable value of all commodities, it is not that by which their value is commonly estimated. It is often difficult to ascertain the proportion between two different quantities of labor. The time spent in two different sorts of work will not always alone determine this proportion. The different degrees of hardship endured and of ingenuity exercised must likewise be taken into account. There may be more labor in an hour's hard work than in 2 hours easy business, or in an hour's application to a trade which it costs 10 years' labor to learn, than in a month's industry at an ordinary and obvious employment. But it is not easy to find any accurate measure either of hardship or ingenuity. In exchanging indeed the different productions of different sorts of labor for one another, some allowance is commonly made for both. It is adjusted, however, not by any accurate measure, but by the higgling and bargaining of the market, according to the sort of rough quality which, though not exact, is sufficient for carrying on the business of common life. Every commodity, besides, is more frequently exchanged for and thereby compared with other commodities than with labor. It is more natural, therefore, to estimate its exchangeable value by the quantity of some other commodity than by that of the labor which it can purchase. The greater part of people too understand better what is meant by a quantity of a particular commodity than by a quantity of labor. The one is a plain palpable object, the other an abstract notion, which, though it can be made sufficiently intelligible, is not altogether so natural and obvious. But when barter ceases, and money has become the common instrument of commerce, every particular commodity is more frequently exchanged for money than for any other commodity. The butcher seldom carries his beef or his mutton, mutton, to the baker, or the brewer in order to exchange them for bread or for beer, but he carries them to the market, where he exchanges them for money, and afterwards exchanges that money for bread and for beer. The quantity of money which he gets for them regulates to the quantity of bread and beer which he can afterwards purchase. It is more natural and obvious to him, therefore, to estimate their value by the quantity of money, the commodity for which he immediately exchanges them, than by that of bread and beer, the commodities for which he can exchange them only by the intervention of another commodity, and rather to say that his butcher's meat is worth 3 pence or 4 pence a pound, than that it is worth 3 or 4 pounds for bread, or 3 or 4 quarts of small beer. I was bartering. Of course, now we're discussing the real and nominal prices and the origins of money, as we know it, currency or money, also known as currency. Coins, bills. Gold and silver, however, like every other commodity, vary in their value, are sometimes cheaper and sometimes dearer, sometimes of easier and sometimes of more difficult purchase. The quantity of labor which any particular quantity of them can purchase or command, or the quantity of other goods which it will exchange for, depends always upon the fertility or barrenness of the mines which happen to be known about the time when such exchanges are made. The discovery of the abundant mines of America reduced, in the 16th century, the value of gold and silver in Europe to about a third of what it had been before, as it cost less labor to bring those metals from the mine to the market. So when they were brought thither, they could purchase or command less labor, and this revolution in their value, though perhaps in their value. Though perhaps the greatest, is by no means the only one of which history gives some account, but as a measure of quantity, such as the natural foot, fat, or handful, which is continually varying in its own quantity, can never be an accurate measure of the quantity of other things. So a commodity which is itself continually varying in its own value can never be an accurate measure of the value of other commodities. Equal quantities of labor at all times and places may be said to be of equal value to the laborer in his ordinary state of health, strength, and spirits, in the ordinary degree of his skill and dexterity. He must always lay down the same portion of his ease, his liberty, and his happiness. The price which he pays must always be the same, whether it may be the quantity of goods which he receives in return for it. Of these, indeed, it may sometimes purchase a greater and sometimes a smaller quantity, but it is in their value which varies, not that of the labor which purchased them. At all times and places that is dear which it is difficult to come at, or which it costs much labor to acquire, or that cheap which is to be had easily, or with very little labor. Labor alone, therefore, never varying in its own value, is alone the ultimate and real standard by which the value of all commodities can at all times and places be estimated and compared. It is their real price. Money is their nominal price only. But though equal quantities of labor are always of equal value to the laborer, yet to the person who employs him they appear sometimes to be of greater and sometimes of smaller value. He purchases them sometimes with a greater and sometimes with a smaller quantity of goods, and to him the price of labor seems to be to vary like that of all other things. It appears to him dear in the one case and cheap in the other. In reality, however, it is the goods which are cheap in the one case and deer in the other. In this popular sense, therefore, labor, like commodities, may be said to have a real and a nominal price. Its real price may be said to consist in the quantity of the necessaries and conveniences of life which are given for it, its nominal price in the quantity of money. The laborer is rich or poor, is well or ill rewarded in proportion to the real, not the nominal price of his labor. Chapter 6. Of the component parts of the price of commodities. In that early and rude state of society which precedes both the accumulation of stock and the appropriation of land, the proportion between the quantities of labor necessary for acquiring different objects seems to be the only circumstance which can afford any rule for exchanging them for one another. If among a nation of hunters, for example, it usually costs twice the labor to kill a beaver which it does to kill a deer, one beaver should naturally exchange for or be worth 2 deer. It is natural that what is usually the produce of 2 days or 2 hours' labor should be worth double of what is usually the produce of 1 day's or 1 hour's labor. If the one species of labor should be more severe than the other, some allowance will naturally be made for this superior hardship, and the produce of one's hour labor in the one way may frequently exchange for that of 2 hours' labor in the other. Or if the one species of labor requires an uncommon degree of dexterity and ingenuity, the esteem which men have for such talents will naturally give a value to their produce, superior to what would be due to the time employed about it. Such talents can seldom be acquired, but in consequence of long application, and the superior value of their produce may frequently be no more than a reasonable compensation for the time and labor which must be spent in acquiring them. In the advanced state of society, allowances of this kind for superior hardship and superior skill are commonly made in the wages of labor, and something of the same kind must probably have taken place in its earliest and rudest period. In this state of things, the whole produce of labor belongs to the laborer, and the quantity of labor commonly employed in acquiring or producing any commodity is the only circumstance which can regulate the quantity of labor which it ought commonly to purchase, command, or exchange for. As soon as stock has accumulated in the hands of particular persons, some of them will naturally employ it in setting to work industrious people, whom they will supply with materials and subsistence, in order to make a profit by the sale of their work, or by what their labor adds to the value of the materials, in exchanging the complete manufacture either for money, for labor, or for other goods, over and above what may be sufficient to pay the price of the materials and the wages of the workmen. Something must be given for the profits of the undertaker of the work who hazards his stock in this adventure. in this adventure. The value which the workmen add to the materials therefore resolves itself in this case into 2 parts, of which the one pays their wages, the other the profits of their employer upon the whole stock of materials and wages which he advanced. He could have no interest to employ them, unless he expected from the sale of their work something more than what was sufficient to replace his stock to him. And he could have no interest to employ a great stock rather than a small one, unless his profits were to bear some proportion to the extent of his stock. The profits of stock, may perhaps be thought, are only a different name for the wages of a particular sort of labor, the labor of inspection and direction. They are, however, altogether different, are regulated by quite sufficient principles, and bear no proportion to the quantity, the hardship, or the ingenuity of this supposed labor of inspection and direction. They are regulated altogether by the value of the stock employed, and are greater or smaller in proportion to the extent of this stock. Let us suppose, for example, that in some particular place where the common annual profits of manufacturing stock are 10% There are two different manufacturers, in each of which 20 workmen are employed at the rate of £15 a year each, or at the expense of 300 a year in each manufactory. Let us suppose too that the coarse materials annually wrought up in the one cost only £700, while the finer materials in the other cost 7,000. The capital annually employed in the one will in this case amount only to £1,000, whereas that employed in the other will amount to £7,300. At the rate of 10%, therefore, the undertaker of the one will expect a yearly profit of about £100 only, while that of the other will expect about £730. £30. But though their profits are so very different, their labor of inspection and direction may be either altogether or very nearly the same. In many great works, almost the whole labor of this kind is committed to some principal clerk. His wages properly express the value of this labor of inspection and direction, though in settling them some regard is had commonly. 1776 English, brothers and sisters, bros, sis and sis bros, fellow citizens of the world. From Hawk Island, also known as Montreal. Although very nearly the same. In many great works, almost the whole labor of this kind is committed to some principal clerk. His wages properly express the value of this labor of inspection and direction, though in settling them some regard is had commonly, not only to his labor and skill, but to the trust which is reposed in him. Yet they never bear any regular proportion to the capital of which he oversees the management, and the owner of this capital, though he is thus discharged of almost all labor, still expects that his profits should bear a regular proportion to his capital. In the price of commodities, therefore, the profits of stock constitute a component part altogether different from the wages of labor and regulated by quite different principles. By quite different principles. In this state of things, the whole produce of labor does not always belong to the laborer. He must in most cases share it with the owner of the stock which employs him. Neither is the quantity of labor commonly employed in acquiring or producing any commodity the only circumstance which can regulate the quantity which it ought commonly to purchase, command, or exchange for. An additional quantity, it is evident, must be due for the profits of the stock which advance the wages and furnish the materials of that labor. As soon as the land of any country has all become private property, the landlords, like all other men, love to reap where they never sowed, and demand the rent even for its natural produce. As soon as the land of any country has all become private property, the landlords, like all other men, love to reap where they never sowed, and demand the rent even for its natural produce. Interesting. Sounds like if Karl Marx was what he calls basically exploitation, and of course interest and other questionable and outright immoral and unethical capitalist principles. As soon as the land of any country has all become private property, the landlords, like all other men, love to reap where they never sowed, and demand the rent even for its natural produce. The wood of the forest, the grass of the field, and all the natural fruits of the earth, which, when land was in common, cost the laborer only the trouble of gathering them, come, even to him, to have an additional price fixed upon them. He must give up to the landlord a portion of what his labor either collects or produces. This portion, or what comes to the same thing, the price of this portion constitutes the rent of land, and in the price of the greater part of commodities makes a third component part. The real value of all the different component parts of price, it must be observed, is measured by the quantity of labor which they can, each of them, purchase or command. Labor measures the value not only of that part of price which resolves itself into labor, but of that which resolves itself into rent, and of that which resolves itself into profit. In every society, the price of every commodity finally resolves itself into some one or other, or all of those three parts, and in every improved society, all the three enter more or less as component parts into the price of the far greater part of commodities. That is the end of chapter 6. Pouring some more coffee. Coffee on the light side because it's 9:30 EST. Add a little bit of milk. We shall continue this reading session. Coffee with Dragon, late night reading session. Training the mind as I'm sore by having trained the body last week. I'm doing good. Gotta keep it up. Both mind, body, and spirit meditations. Chapter 7 of the natural and market price of commodities. When the price of any commodity is neither more nor less than what is sufficient to pay the rent of the land, the wages of the labor, and the profits of the stock employed in raising, preparing, and bringing it to the market, according to their natural rates, the commodity is then sold for what may be called its natural price. The commodity is then sold precisely for what it is worth, or for what it really costs the person who brings it to the market. For though in common language what is called the prime cost of any commodity does not comprehend the profit of the person who is to sell it again, yet if he sells it at a price which does not allow him the ordinary rate of profit in his neighborhood, he is evidently a loser by the trade, since by employing his stock in some other way he might have made that profit. His profit, besides, is his revenue, the proper fund of his subsistence, as while he is preparing and bringing the goods to market, he advances to his workmen their wages or their subsistence, so he advances to himself, in the same manner, his own subsistence, which is generally suitable to the profit which he may reasonably expect from the sale of his goods, unless they yield him this profit. However, therefore, they do not repay him what they may very properly be said to have really cost him. Though the price, therefore, which leaves him this profit is not always the lowest at which a dealer may sometimes sell his goods, it is the lowest at which he is likely to sell them for any considerable time, at least where there is perfect liberty, or where he may change his trade as often as he pleases. This was perfect liberty. The actual price at which any commodity is commonly sold is called its market price. The actual price at which any commodity is commonly sold is called its market price. The actual price at which any commodity is commonly sold is called its market price. We hear that. If you listen to the news, of course, you hear that a lot, especially in business news and financial related news and commerce trade related news. It may either be above or below, or exactly the same with its natural price. The market price of every particular commodity is regulated by the proportion between the quantity which is actually brought to the market and the demand of those who are willing to pay the natural price of the commodity. In economics, for one of the important rules, of course, of supply and demand, which we see here stated in 1776 English by Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations. Demand of those who are willing to pay the natural price of the commodity, or the whole value of the rent, labor, and profit which must be paid in order to bring it thither, Thither, to the market, there. Such people may be called the effectual demanders, and their demand the effectual demand, since it may be sufficient to effectuate the bringing of the commodity to market. It is different from the absolute demand. A very poor man may be said in some sense to have a demand for a coach and six. He might like to have it, but his demand is not an effectual demand. as the commodity can never be brought to market in order to satisfy it. When the quantity of any commodity which is brought to market falls short of the effectual demand, all those who are willing to pay the whole value of the rent, wages, and profit which must be paid in order to bring it thither cannot be supplied with the quantity which they want, rather than want it altogether. Some of them will be willing to give more. A competition will immediately begin among them, and the market price will rise more or less above the natural price, according as either the greatness of the deficiency or the wealth and wanton luxury of the competitors happen to animate more or less the eagerness of the competition. Among competitors of equal wealth and luxury, the same deficiency will generally occasion a more or less eager competition according as the acquisition of the commodity happens to be of more or less importance to them. Hence the exorbitant price of the necessaries of life during the blockade of a town or in famine. When the quantity brought to market exceeds the effectual demand, it cannot be all sold to those who are willing to pay the whole value of the rent, wages, and profit, which must be paid in order to bring it thither. Some part must be sold to those who are willing to pay less, and the low price which they give for it must reduce the price of the whole. The market price will sink more or less below the natural price, according as the greatness of the excess increases more or less the competition of the sellers. This is important, or according as it happens to be more or less important to them to get immediately rid of the commodity. So here it outlines, of course, if it's overproduction, what's called in 2019 language more overproduction, and studied, of course, in economics and discussed. Or not enough, of course. Lack of supply. Deficient production. Well, the same excess in the importation of perishable will occasion a much greater competition than in that of durable commodities, in the importation of oranges, for example, than in that of old iron. When the quantity brought to market is just sufficient to supply the effectual demand and no more, the market price naturally comes to be either exactly or as nearly as can be judged of. The same with the natural price. The whole quantity upon hand can be disposed of for this price and cannot be disposed of for more. The competition of the different dealers obliges them all to accept of this price, but does not oblige them to accept of less. The quantity of every commodity brought to market naturally suits itself to the effectual demand. It is the interest of all those who employ their land, labor, or stock in bringing any commodity to market that the quantity never should exceed the effectual demand, to have what's called in 2019 economics equilibrium. Wow, is hinting at that, right? It's just not the same terms, but equilibrium, it's called market equilibrium. I'm an independent scholar, of course, of economics, so but have to also revise and study more. But from what I can remember, double fact check me on that. It's called market equilibrium. Short of that demand, if and it is in the interest of all other people that it never should fall short of that demand, of course, for short or exceed. If at any time it exceeds the effectual demand, some of the component parts of its price must be paid below their natural rate. If it is rent, the interest of the landlords will immediately prompt them to withdraw part of their land. And if it is wages or profit, the interest of the laborers in the one case and of their employers in the other will prompt them to withdraw part of their labor or stock from this employment. The quantity brought to market will soon be no more than sufficient to supply the effectual demand. All the different parts of its price will rise to their natural rate, and the whole price to its natural price. If, on the contrary, the quantity brought to market should at any time fall short of the effectual demand, some of the component parts of its price must rise above their natural rate. If it is rent, the interest of all other landlords will naturally prompt them to prepare more land for the raising of this commodity. If it is wages or profits, the interest of all other laborers and dealers will soon prompt them to employ more labor and stock in preparing and bringing it to the market. The quantity brought thither will soon be sufficient to supply the effectual demand. All the different parts of its price will soon sink to their natural rate, and the whole price to its natural price. The natural price, therefore, is as it were the central price, to which the prices of all commodities are continually gravitating. Different accidents may sometimes keep them suspended a good deal above it, and sometimes force them down even somewhat below it. But whatever may be the obstacles which hinder them from settling in this center or repose and continuance, they are constantly tending towards. Just because I was thinking of an example, take this coffee right here. Okay, but this coffee is not the greatest, but let's say coffee beans or a certain variety of Arabica beans or XY from there, from let's say from Brazil. Brazil is actually the number one exporter of coffee by a big margin, actually, in millions of tons, right, annually. In 2018, for last year, was Brazil, the country of Brazil, who exported most coffee beans. So let's say coffee Arabica, coffee beans from Brazil at X price, market equilibrium, 93 cents, let's say, per pound. That's bought there or sold on the stock market in Brazil or in the commodities in Brazil with the companies. But let's say if that's 93 cents a pound, let's say for argument's sake, and if it falls short of the production, the demand for coffee is actually growing. So that being considered, let's say on a given period of time, so it's that the demand. So if the demand is at X and the supply is at Y, say there is an equilibrium there. But of course, if the supply falls in the minus the next month, and let's say that the demand stays the same, although the demand does not stay the same, but let's say, and there's a fall in production because X and Y reason, natural or other reasons of the crops or something happened and lost 10%. And we say that even the price could probably go in proportion 10% higher. So 93 cents, say 10% is 9.3 cents. So it could go up to $1, right? Things of that nature. I was just thinking of that while reading coffee, because Coffee with Dragon is my show, my meditation, cup of coffee. I'm looking to do it with other people to discuss the readings and participation, not competition but cooperation. And no more than supply. The whole quantity of industry. Wait. But whatever may be the obstacles which hinder them from settling in this center of repose and continuance, they are constantly tending towards it. The whole quantity of industry annually employed in order to bring any commodity to market naturally suits itself in this manner to the effectual demand. It naturally aims at bringing always that precise quantity thither which may be sufficient to supply, but no more than supply, that is, that demand. But in some employments, the same quantity of industry will in different years produce very different quantities of commodities, while in others it will produce always the same or very nearly the same. The same number of laborers in husbandry will, in different years, produce very different quantities of corn, wine, oil, hops, hops, etc. But the same number of spinners and weavers will every year produce the same or nearly the same quantity of linen and woolen cloth. It is only the average produce of the one species of industry which can be suited in any respect to the effectual demand, and as its annual produce is frequently much greater and frequently much less than its average produce, the quantity of the commodities brought to market will sometimes exceed a good deal, and sometimes fall short a good deal, of the effectual demand, even though the demand therefore should continue always the same. Their market price will be liable to great fluctuations, will sometimes fall a good deal below and sometimes rise a good deal above their natural price. In the other species of industry, the produce of equal quantities of labor will being always the same or very nearly the same, it can be more exactly suited to the effectual demand. While the demand continues the same, therefore the market price of the commodities is likely to do so, and to be either altogether or as nearly as can be judged of the same with the natural price. That the price of linen and woolen cloth is liable neither to such frequent nor to such great variations as the price of corn, every man's experience will inform him. The price of the other species of commodities varies only with the variations in the demand. That of the other varies not only with the variations in the demand, but with the much greater and more frequent variations in the quantity of what is brought to market in order to supply that demand. The occasional and temporary fluctuations in the market price of any commodity fall chiefly upon those parts of its price which resolve themselves into wages and profit. That part which resolves itself into rent is less affected by them. A rent certain in money is not in the least affected by them, either in its rate or in its value. A rent which consists either in a certain proportion or in a certain quantity of the root produce is no doubt affected in its yearly value by all the occasional and temporary fluctuations in the market price of that root produce, but it is seldom affected by them in its yearly rate. In settling the terms of the lease, the landlord and farmer endeavor, according to their best judgment, to adjust that rate not to the temporary and occasional, but to the average and ordinary price of the produce. Such fluctuations affect both the value and the rate either of wages or of profit, according as the market happens to be either overstocked or understocked with commodities or with labor, with work done or with work to be done. A public mourning raises the price of black cloth. A public mourning raises the price of black cloth. A public mourning raises the price of black cloth, CLOTH, with which the market is almost always understocked upon such occasions, and augments the profits of the merchants who possess any considerable quantity of it. It has no effect upon the wages of the weavers. The market is understocked with commodities, not with labor, with work done, not with work to be done. It raises the wages of journeymen tailors. The market is here understocked with labor. There is an effectual demand for more labor, for more work to be done than can be had. It sinks the price of colored silks and cloths, and thereby reduces the profits of the merchants who have any considerable quantity of them upon hand. It sinks too the wages of the workmen employed in preparing such commodities, for which all demand is stopped for 6 months, perhaps for 12 months. The market is here overstocked both with commodities and with labor. But though the market price of every particular commodity is in this manner continually gravitating, if one may say so, towards the natural price, yet sometimes particular accidents, sometimes natural causes, and sometimes particular regulations of police, made many commodities keep up the market price for a long time together, a good deal above the natural price. When by an increase in the effectual demand, the market price of some particular commodity happens to rise a good deal above the natural price, those who employ their stock in supplying that market, are generally careful to conceal this change. If it was commonly known, their great profit would tempt so many new rivals to employ their stock in the same way, that the effectual demand being fully supplied, the market price would soon be reduced to the natural price, perhaps for some time even below it. If the market is at a great distance from the residence of those who supply it, they may sometimes be able to keep the secret for several years together, and may so long enjoy their extraordinary profits without any new rivals. Secrets of this kind, however, it must be acknowledged, can seldom be long kept, and the extraordinary profit can last very little longer than they are kept. Secrets in manufactures are capable of being longer kept than secrets in trade. A dyer who has found the means of producing a particular color with materials which cost only half the price of those commonly made use of, may, with good management, enjoy the advantage of his discovery as long as he lives, and even leave it as a legacy to his posterity. His extraordinary gains arise from the high price which is paid for his private labor. they properly consist in the high wages of that labor, but as they are repeated upon every part of his stock, and as their whole amount bears upon that account a regular proportion to it, they are commonly considered extraordinary profits of stock. Such enhancements of the market price are evidently the effects of particular accidents, of which, however, the operation may sometimes last for many years together. Some natural productions require such a singularity of soil and situation that all the land in a great country which is fit for producing them may not be sufficient to supply the effectual demand. The whole quantity brought to market therefore may be disposed of to those who are willing to give more than what is sufficient to pay the rent of the land which produced them, together with the wages of the labor, and the profits of the stock which were employed in preparing and bringing them to market, according to their natural rates. Such commodities may continue for whole centuries together to be sold at this high price, and that part of it which resolves itself into the rent of land is in this case the part which is generally paid above its natural rate. The rent of the land which affords such singular and esteemed productions, like the rent of some vineyards in France of a peculiarly happy soil and situation, bears no regular proportion to the rent of other equally fertile and equally well cultivated land in its neighborhood. The wages of the labor and the profits of the stock employed in bringing such commodities to market, on the contrary, are seldom out of their natural proportion to those of the other employments of labor and stock in their neighborhood. Such enhancements of the market price are evidently the effect of natural causes, which may hinder the effectual demand for it ever from ever being fully supplied, and which may continue therefore to operate forever. A monopoly granted either to an individual or to a trading company has the same effect as a secret in trade or manufactures. The monopolists, by keeping the market constantly understocked, by never fully supplying the effectual demand, sell their commodities much above the natural price, and raise their emoluments, spelled Emoluments. That's 1776 English for you. Emoluments, and raise their emoluments. Emoluments, whether they consist in wages or profit, greatly above their natural rate. The price of a monopoly is upon every occasion the highest which can be bought. The natural price, or the price of free competition, on the contrary, is the lowest which can be taken, not upon every occasion indeed, but for any considerable time together. The one is upon every occasion the highest which can be squeezed out of the buyers, or which it is supposed they will consent to give. The other is the lowest which the sellers can commonly afford to take, and at the same time continue their business. The exclusive privileges of corporations, statutes of apprenticeship, and all those laws which restrain in particular employments the competition to a smaller number that might otherwise go into them, have the same tendency, though in a less degree. They are a sort of enlarged monopolies, and may frequently for ages together, and in whole classes of employments, keep up the market price of particular commodities above the natural price, and maintain both the wages of their labor and the profits of the stock employed about them somewhat above their natural rate. Such enhancements of the market price may last as long as the regulations of police would give occasion to them. The market price of any particular commodity, though it may continue long above, can seldom continue long below its natural price. Whatever part of it was paid below the natural rate, the persons whose interest it affected would immediately feel the loss and would immediately withdraw either so much land or so much labor or so much stock from being employed about it, that the quantity brought to market would soon be no more than sufficient to supply the effectual demand. Its market price, therefore, would soon rise to the natural price. This at least would be the case where there was perfect liberty. The same statutes of apprenticeship and other corporation laws indeed, which when a manufacturer is in prosperity, enable the workman to raise his wages a good deal above their natural rate, sometimes obliges him, when it decays, to let them down a good deal below it. As in the one case they exclude many people from his employment, so in the other they exclude him from many employments. The effect of such regulations, however, is not near so durable in sinking the workmen's wages below as in raising them above the natural rate. Their operation in the one way may endure for many centuries, but in the other it can last no longer than the lives of some of the workmen who were bred to the business in the time of its prosperity. When they are gone, the number of those who are afterwards educated to the trade will naturally suit itself to the effectual demand. The police must be as violent as that of Indostan, Indostan, or ancient Egypt, where every man was bound by a principle of religion to follow the occupation of his father and was supposed to commit the most horrid sacrilege if he changed it for another, which can in any particular employment and for several generations together sink either the wages of labor or the profits of stock below their natural rate. This is all that I think necessary to be observed at present concerning the deviations, whether occasional or permanent, of the market price of commodities from the natural price. Chapter 8 of the Wages of Labor. The produce of labor constitutes the natural recompense of or wages of labor in that original state of things which precedes both the appropriation of land and the accumulation of stock. The whole produce of labor belongs to the laborer. He has neither landlord nor master to share with it. Had this state continued, the wages of labor would have augmented with all those improvements in its productive powers to which the division of labor gives occasion. All things would gradually have become cheaper. They would have been produced by a smaller quantity of labor, and as the commodities produced by equal quantities of labor would naturally in this state of things be exchanged for one another, they would have been purchased likewise with the produce of a smaller quantity. But though all things would have become cheaper in reality, in appearance many things might have become dearer than before, or have been exchanged for a greater quantity of other goods. Let us suppose, for example, that in the greater part of employments the productive powers of labor had been improved to tenfold, or that a day's labor could produce 10 times the quantity of work which it had done originally, or that in a particular employment they had been improved only to double, or that a day's labor could produce only twice the quantity of work which it had done before, in exchanging the produce of a day's labor in the greater part of employments for that of a day's labor in this particular one. 10 times the original quantity of work in them would purchase only twice the original quantity in it. Any particular quantity in it, therefore, a pound weight, for example, would appear to be 5 times dearer than before. In reality, however, it would be twice as cheap, though it required 5 times the quantity of other goods to purchase it. It would require only half the quantity of labor either to purchase or to produce it. The acquisition, therefore, would be twice as easy as before. But this original state of things, in which the laborer enjoyed the whole produce of his own labor, could not last beyond the first introduction of the appropriation of land and the accumulation of stock. It was at an end Therefore, long before the most considerable improvements were made in the productive powers of labor, it would be to no purpose to trace further what might have been its effects upon the recompense or wages of labor. As soon as land becomes private property, the landlord demands a share of almost all the produce, which the laborer can either raise or collect from it. His rent makes the first deduction from the produce of the labor which is employed upon land. It seldom happens that the person who tills the ground has wherewithal to maintain himself till he reaps the harvest. His maintenance is generally advanced to him from the stock of a master, farmer who employs him, and who would have no interest to employ him unless he was to share in the produce of his labor, or unless his stock was to be replaced to him with the profit. This profit makes a second deduction from the produce of the labor which is employed upon land. The produce of almost all other labor is liable to the like deduction or profit of profit deduction of profit. In all arts and manufactures, the greater part of the workmen stand in need of a master to advance them the materials of their work and their wages and maintenance till it be completed. He shares in the produce of their labor and the value which it adds to the materials upon which it is bestowed, and in this share consists his profit. It sometimes happens indeed that a single independent workman has stock sufficient both to purchase the materials of his work and to maintain himself till it be completed. He is both master and workman, and enjoys the whole produce of his own labor, or the whole value which it adds to the materials upon which it is bestowed. It includes what are usually two distinct revenues belonging to two distinct persons, profits of stock and the wages of labor. Such cases, however, are not very frequent, and in every part of Europe 20 workmen serve under a master from one that is independent, and the wages of labor are everywhere understood to be what they usually are, when the laborer is one person and the owner of the stock which employs him another. What are the common wages of labor? Depends everywhere upon the contract usually made between those two parties, whose interests are by no means the same. The workman desires to get as much, the masters to give as little as possible. The former are disposed to combine in order to raise, the latter in order to lower the wages of labor. It is not, however, difficult to foresee which of the two parties must, upon all ordinary occasions, have the advantage in the dispute, and force the other into compliance with their terms. The masters, being fewer in number, can combine much more easily, and the law, besides, authorizes or at least does not prohibit their combinations, while it prohibits those of the workmen. Unions. We have no acts of parliament against combining to lower the price of work, but many against combining to raise it. In all such disputes the masters can hold out much longer. A landlord, a farmer, a master manufacturer, or merchant, though they did not employ a single workman, could generally live a year or two upon the stocks which they have already acquired. Many workmen could not subsist a week. Few could subsist a month. Scarcely a year without employment. In the long run the workman may be as necessary to his master as his master is to him, but the necessity is not so immediate. We rarely hear, it has been said, of the combinations of masters, though frequently of those of workmen. But whoever imagines upon his account that masters rarely combine is as ignorant of the world as of the subject. Masters are always and everywhere in a sort of tacit, constant, and uniform combination, not to raise the wages of labor above their actual rate. To violate this combination is everywhere a most unpopular action and a sort of reproach to a master among his neighbors and equals. We seldom indeed hear of this combination because it is usual, and one may say the natural state of things which nobody even hears of. Masters too sometimes enter into particular combinations to sink the wages of labor even below this rate. These are always conducted with the utmost silence and secrecy, till the moment of execution, and when the workmen yield, as they sometimes do without resistance, though severely fell by them, they are never heard of by other people. Such combinations, however, are frequently resisted by a contrary defensive combination of the workmen, who sometimes too, without any provocation of this kind, combine of their own accord to raise the price of their labor. 2019 language unions to form unions and associations. Their usual pretenses are sometimes the high price of provisions, sometimes the great profit which their masters make by their work, but whether their combinations be offensive or defensive, they are always abundantly heard of. In order to bring the point to a speedy decision, they have always recourse to the loudest clamor, and sometimes to the most shocking violence and outrage. They are desperate, and act with the folly and extravagance of desperate men, who must either starve or frighten their masters into an immediate compliance with their demands. The masters, upon these occasions, are just as clamorous upon the other side, and never cease to call aloud for the assistance of the civil magistrate, and the rigorous execution of those laws which have been enacted with so much severity against the combinations of servants, laborers, and journeymen. The workmen, accordingly, very seldom derive any advantage from the violence of those tumultuous combinations which, partly from the interposition of the civil magistrate, partly from the superior steadiness of the masters, partly from the necessity which the greater part of the workmen are under of submitting for the sake of present subsistence, generally end in nothing but the punishment or ruin of the ringleaders. Though in disputes with their workmen, masters must generally have the advantage. There is, however, a certain rate below which it seems impossible to reduce, for any considerable time, the ordinary wages even of the lowest species of labor. A man must always live by his work, and his wages must at least be sufficient to maintain him. They must even upon most occasions be somewhat more, otherwise it would be impossible for him to bring up a family, and the race of such workmen could not last beyond the first generation. There are certain circumstances, however, which sometimes gives the laborers an advantage, and enable them to raise their wages considerably above this rate, evidently the lowest which is consistent with common humanity. When in any country the demand for those who live by wages, laborers, journeymen, servants of every kind, is continually increasing, when every year furnishes employment for a greater number than had been employed the year before, the workmen have no occasion to combine in order to raise their wages. The scarcity of hands occasions a competition among masters, who bid against one another in order to get workmen, and thus voluntarily break through the natural combination of masters not to raise wages. The demand for those who live by wages, it is evident, cannot increase but in proportion to the increase of the funds which are destined for the payment of wages. These funds are of two kinds. First, the revenue which is over and above what is necessary for the maintenance, and secondly, the stock which is over and above what is necessary for the employment of their masters. The demand for those who live by wages therefore necessarily increases with the increase of the revenue and stock of every country, and cannot possibly increase without it. The increase of revenue and stock is the increase of national wealth. The demand for those who live by wages, therefore, naturally increases with the increase of national wealth, and cannot possibly increase without it. It is not the actual greatness of national wealth, but its continual increase, which occasions a rise in the wages of labor. It is not accordingly in the richest countries, but in the most thriving, or in those which are growing rich the fastest, that the wages of labor are highest. England is certainly, in the present times, a much richer country than any part of North America. The wages of labor, however, are much higher in North America than in any part of England. The demand for laborers, the funds destined for maintaining them, increase, it seems, still faster than they can find laborers to employ. In Great Britain, the wages of labor seem in the present times to be evidently more than what is precisely necessary to enable the laborer to bring up a family. First, in almost every part of Great Britain there is a distinction, even in the lowest species of labor, between summer and winter wages. Summer wages are always highest, but on account of the extraordinary expense of fuel, the maintenance of a family is most expensive in winter. Wages, therefore, being highest when this expense is lowest, it seems evident that they are not regulated by what is necessary for this expense, but by the quantity and supposed value of the work. The laborer, it may be said, indeed, ought to save part of his summer wages in order to defray his winter expense, and that through the whole year they do not exceed what is necessary to maintain his family through the whole year. A slave, however, or one absolutely dependent on us for immediate subsistence, would not be treated in this manner. His daily subsistence would be proportioned to his daily necessities. Secondly, the wages of labor do not in Great Britain fluctuate with the price of provisions. These vary everywhere, from year to year, frequently from month to month, but in many places the money price of labor remains uniformly the same, sometimes for half a century together. If in these places, therefore, the laboring poor can maintain their families in their years, they must be at their ease in times of moderate plenty, and in affluence in those of extraordinary cheapness. The high price of provisions during these 10 years past has not in many parts of the kingdom been accompanied with any sensible rise in the money price of labor. It has indeed in some, owing probably more to the increase of the demand for labor than to that of the price of provisions. Thirdly, as the price of provisions varies more from year to year than the wages of labor, so on the other hand, the wages of labor vary more from place to place than the price of provisions. The prices of bread and butcher's meat are generally the same or very nearly the same through the greater part of the United Kingdom. These and most other things which are sold by retail, the way in which the laboring poor buy all things, are generally fully as cheap or cheaper in great towns than in the remoter parts of the country, for reasons which I shall have occasion to explain hereafter. But the wages of labor in a great town and its neighborhood are frequently a fourth or a fifth part, 20 or 5 and 20% higher than at a few miles distance. 18 pence a day may be reckoned the common price of labor in London and its neighborhood. At a few miles distance it falls to 14 and 15 pence. 10 pence may be reckoned its price in Edinburgh and its neighborhood. At a few miles distance it falls to 8 pence, the usual price of common labor through the greater part of the low country of Scotland, where it varies a good deal less than in England. Such a difference of prices, which it seems is not always sufficient to transport a man from one parish to another, would necessarily occasion so great a transportation of the most bulky commodities, not only from one parish to another, but from one end of the kingdom, almost from one end of the world to the other, as would soon reduce them more nearly to a level. After all that has been said of the levity and inconstancy of human nature, it appears evidently from experience that a man is of all sorts of luggage the most difficult to be transported. If the laboring poor, therefore, can maintain their families in those parts of the kingdom where the price of labor is lowest, they must be in affluence where it is highest. Fourthly, the variations in the price of labor not only do not correspond either in place or time with those in the price of provisions, but they are frequently quite opposite. Oatmeal indeed supplies the common people in Scotland with the greatest and the best part of their food, which is in general much inferior to that of their neighbours of the same rank in England. This difference, however, in the mode of their subsistence is not the cause, but the effect of the difference in their wages, though by a strange misapprehension I have frequently heard it represented as the cause. It is not because one man keeps a coach while his neighbor walks afoot that the one is rich and the other poor, but because the one is rich, he keeps a coach, and because the other is poor, he walks afoot. The liberal reward of labor, by enabling them to provide better for their children, and consequently to bring up a greater number, naturally tends to widen and extend those limits. It deserves to be remarked too that it necessary does this as nearly as possible in the proportion which the demand for labor requires. If this demand is continually increasing, the reward of labor must necessarily encourage in such a manner the marriage and multiplication of laborers as may enable them to supply that continually increasing demand by a continually increasing population. If the reward should at any time be less than what was requisite for this purpose, the deficiency of hands would soon raise it, and if it should at any time be more, their excessive multiplication would soon lower it to this necessary rate. The market would be so much understocked with labor in the one case, so much overstocked in the other, as it would soon force back its price to that proper rate which the circumstances of the society required. It is in this manner that the demand for men, like that for any other commodity, necessarily regulates the production of men, quickens it when it goes on too slowly, and stops it when it advances too fast. It is this demand which regulates and determines the state of propagation in all the different countries of the world, in North America, in Europe, and in China, which renders it rapidly progressive in the first, slow and gradual in the second, and altogether stationary in the last. The liberal reward of labor, as it encourages the propagation, so it increases the industry of the common people. The wages of labor are the encouragement of industry, which, like every other human quality, improves in proportion to the encouragement it receives. It receives. A plentiful subsistence increases the bodily strength of the laborer, and the comfortable hope of bettering his condition and of ending his days perhaps in ease and plenty animates him to exert that strength to the utmost. Where wages are high, accordingly, we shall always find the workman more active, diligent, and expeditious than where they are low. In England, for example, than in Scotland, in the neighbourhood of great towns, than in remote country places. The increasing the wages of labor necessarily increases the price of many commodities, by increasing that part of it which resolves itself into wages, and so far tends to diminish their consumption both at home and abroad. The same cause, however, which raises the wages of labor, the increase of stock, tends to increase its productive powers and to make a smaller quantity of labor produce a greater quantity of work. The owner of the stock, which employs a great number of laborers, necessarily endeavors for his own advantage to make such a proper division and distribution of employment that they may be enabled to produce the greatest quantity of work possible. For the same reason, he endeavors to supply them with the best machinery which either he or they can think of. What takes place among the laborers in a particular workhouse takes place, for the same reason, among those of a great society. The greater their number, the more they naturally divide themselves into different classes and subdivisions of employment. More heads are occupied in inventing the most proper machinery for executing the work of each, and it is therefore more likely to be invented. There are many commodities, therefore, which in consequence of these improvements come to be produced by so much less labor than before, that the increase of its price is more than compensated by the diminution of its quantity. of the profits of stock. The rise and fall in the profits of stock depend upon the same causes with the rise and fall in wages of labor, the increasing or declining state of the wealth of the society. Those causes affect the one and the other very differently. The increase of stock, which raises wages, tends to lower profit. When the stocks of many rich merchants are turned into the same trade, their mutual competition naturally tends to lower its profit. And when there is a like increase of stock in all the different trades carried on in the same society, the same competition must produce the same effect in them all. It is not easy, it has already been observed, to ascertain what are the average wages of labor even in a particular place and at a particular time. We can, even in this case, seldom determine more than what are the most usual wages, but even this can seldom be done with regard to the profits of stock. Profit, profit is so very fluctuating that the person who carries on a particular trade cannot always tell you himself what is the average of his annual profit. It is affected not only by every variation of price in the commodities which he deals in, but by the good or bad fortune both of his rivals and of his customers, and by a thousand other accidents to which goods, when carried either by sea or land, or even when stored in a warehouse, are liable. It varies therefore not only from year to year, but from day to day, and almost from hour to hour. To ascertain what is the average profit of all the different trades carried on in a great kingdom must be much more difficult. To judge of what it may have been formerly, or in remote periods of time, with any degree of precision, may be altogether impossible. But though it may be impossible to determine with any degree of precision what are or were the average profits of stock, either in the present or in ancient times, some notion may be formed of them from the interest of money. May be laid down as a maxim that wherever a great deal can be made by the use of money, a great deal will commonly be given for the use of it, and that whether little can be made of it, less will commonly be given for it. According, therefore, as the usual market rate of interest varies in any country, we may be assured that the ordinary profits of stock must vary with it, must sink as it sinks, and rise as it rises. The progress of interest, therefore, may lead us to form some notion of the progress of profit. It generally requires a greater stock to carry on any sort of trade in a great town than in a country village. The nature, accumulation, and employment of stock. Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith. Coffee with Dragon. Third and final reading session for The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. May 1st, 2019, according to some. Peace, harmony, love.